What wedges should I play? It sounds like the easiest question in the world to answer, but with so many different wedges out there on the market today from manufacturers like Titleist and TaylorMade, Ping and Callaway and Mizuno, Wilson, from Cleveland, all these different options. Plus you have to consider all the different things like loft, like bounce, like sole grind configurations, like gapping. How are you supposed to figure out what wedges you should be playing? The first thing you need to do before you decide exactly what wedges you're gonna play is you need to be really honest about what kind of player you are. If you're a highly skilled player, then chances are good you are going to be looking at a 4-wedge system, meaning a pitching wedge, a gap wedge, a sand wedge, and a lob wedge. If you're the type of player who wants to make sure that you have lots of full swings with your wedges and with your scoring clubs, you don't want to be between clubs, whether you're from the fairway or someplace close to the green. The more wedges you have, the more versatility you're going to have, the more you're probably looking at a 4-wedge system. But if you are somebody who struggles to shoot, say, anywhere below 90 or 95, if you're somebody who has got a 20 handicap or higher, you should probably be in a 3-wedge system, which means you're going to have a pitching wedge and a gap wedge and a sand wedge. You're not, in my opinion, going to be a candidate for a lob wedge. Why is that? Lob wedges are really hard to hit, and more often than not, they can get you in trouble if you're not a skilled enough player to use them. A sand wedge, which might have 54 to 56 degrees of loft, is plenty of loft for players who are shooting in the 90s, 100s, and above. It'll give you all the loft you need from the sand, around the green, and such. I highly recommend you stay away from lob wedges, 58 degrees and 60 degrees, until you're skilled enough to really use them consistently. The next thing you need to decide is whether you're going to use the pitching wedge that would come with your irons, or if you're going to get a true pitching wedge and not use the one that would come with your iron. This is going to be a really important decision because the lofts of the pitching wedges that often come with modern iron sets can be very different than what you might think. And for example, this TaylorMade P790 has a standard pitching wedge loft that comes at 45 degrees. However, many pitching wedges that come standard with game improvement and certainly max game improvement iron sets may have lofts as low as, say, 41 or 40 degrees even. So if I go into my store and just take off the rack a 52-degree gap wedge, I could have a massive gap, say 10, 11, maybe even 12 degrees of loft between the pitching wedge that I'm going to be using and the gap wedge. You don't want to have massive gaps in the loft between your scoring clubs, your shortest irons, and your wedges. You want to be able to make full swings whenever you can. Having a 10-degree gap loft between your pitching wedge and your gap wedge is a recipe for disaster. So if you're going to be somebody who wants to go with a true pitching wedge, then you need to take a look at your 9-iron. Find out exactly how much loft your 9-iron has, and then make your purchases accordingly when it comes to a pitching wedge, gap wedge, and so on. Once you know the number of wedges you're going to have in your bag and what the lofts of those wedges are going to be, the next thing to think about is bounce. Now, a lot of people get confused when it comes to bounce because bounce is actually used to describe 2 different things. The first is the actual back flange on the bottom of your wedge. Now, every iron and wedge in your bag is going to have some bounce and is measured in degrees. And what you're really measuring is the bounce angle, which unfortunately is often referred to just simply as bounce. Bounce angle is created from taking a look at where the lowest point is on the bounce here and going up to the leading edge. Now, how abruptly or how much that goes up determines the bounce angle. A high bounce wedge is going to have about, say, 12 to 14 degrees of bounce, and that's going to make it really good in sand and in thick rough because that bounce is going to act almost like a rudder and keep the leading edge up so the wedge isn't going to dig into the sand. It's going to be really helpful. A low bounce wedge might have, say, between 4 and 6 degrees of bounce, and that's going to be really good when you're playing on especially firm turf, link-style golf courses, or in bunkers where there is almost no sand or perhaps very, very wet sand, because a high bounce wedge, when it hits firm turf, it actually might strike it and bounce up, skip, and that will cause the leading edge to go into the ball and you're going to blade it. I think for most recreational golfers, it's a really good idea to have one high bounce option and one low bounce option in your set. That way, no matter where you are on the golf course, you'll have an option you can play. The final thing to think about when it comes to wedges is going to be sole grind and sole configuration. Now, when you're talking about pitching wedges and gap wedges, those are going to have a relatively straight sole grind because, again, they're a continuation of your iron set. You can almost think about a pitching wedge as being a 10-iron and a gap wedge as being an 11-iron. And back in the day, many different sets did come with, for example, a 10-iron. But once you get into the sand wedge and the lob wedge, when you're going to be opening up the faces to be able to hit different shots, having a little bit of a different sole grind configuration can really be helpful. So what are some things you want to look for? Wedges that have a little bit of material ground out of the heel section oftentimes make it easier for players to play delicate shots both from the bunker as well as from the fairway and the rough, because you can open up the face, exposing more of the loft, creating a higher amount of loft, but still get the leading edge underneath the golf ball. If you get that material were still in the heel, it's going to elevate the leading edge and it's going to make it more difficult to hit a high shot with a lot of loft. Also, by taking out material in the toe section, it's going to, again, add more versatility. Exactly what kind of sole grind and sole configuration you're going to need is going to vary on what shots you play most often. So at this point, I want to talk to you really quick about rust. A lot of players may be under the impression that a rusty wedge will create more friction and therefore more spin. That's not the case. There's nothing about rust that adds spin. Rust can make wedges look really cool. Rust can help to reduce glare on sunny days when you're both playing shots from the rough and certainly from bunkers, because that rust will disperse the light. But rusty wedges do not create more spin than standard wedges. If you're looking for more spin, make sure you keep the grooves in your wedges clean and make sure you replace your sand wedges and your lob wedges often so that the grooves stay sharp. Look, there's no way for me to tell you exactly what wedges you should have in your bag through video. I haven't seen your game. I don't know what golf courses you're going to be playing. A good custom fitter, however, should be able to help you get into the right clubs. When you're thinking about wedges broadly and you're trying to answer the question, what wedges should I play? Again, think about that decision tree. How many wedges should I be playing? 3 or 4. What should the lofts of those wedges be? Once I get those questions answered, then I want to think about bounce and make sure that I've got a high bounce and a low bounce option, or bounce options that are appropriate for me and the region where I'm playing. Then start thinking about sole grind when it gets into your sand wedge and your lob wedge to increase the amount of versatility that you've got around the greens. Do those things and you'll be able to answer the question, what wedges should I play?